So I loved art since I was a kid. I always dabbled and doodled and painted in different medias, but it was just childish. And then I went to Music and Art High School, and then I went to City College and wanted to major in art and history, which is like perfect for Krishna conscious paintings. And then just before I joined Prabhupada, I brought a friend of mine to a art show that the school was having. And he said, which is yours? And I wanted to be humble, so I said, which is the worst one? And he picked mine. So that's where I was at when I first came to Prabhupada. And he asked one of the brahmacharis to ask me what my talent was. So I told him I liked art, and then he went back up to tell Prabhupada. And then Prabhupada immediately called me up to his room and started giving me Indian prints, like that size Indian print, to copy for his first ISKCON temple. First he gave me the Sankirtan painting, and he said, make a big painting for the temple. So in my black jeans and black tight turtleneck shirt, I went to the art store and got the canvas frame, and sat on the floor with the painting against the wall and paint splashing all over everywhere. I was such a slob that I was using my jeans as a paint rag. And then Prabhupada came down to the temple room when I was in the middle of the painting, and he said, he could have said anything because the proportions were all wrong. The original was 1,000,000 times better. But instead he looked at the painting, he looked at me, and he said, made a big announcement, because wherever he went, there was iron filings of devotees surrounding him. He said, oh, Krishna has sent. And then he invited me to paint in his quarters. And I said, well, I hesitate to do so because of the paint fumes. He said, it doesn't matter. So I painted in one room, and he dictated his books and took prasadam and greeted guests in another room. And then I painted in the room where later Lord Jagannath first came, and also where they would cook, particularly the Sunday feast, and where Prabhupada did his bells of offering the bhoga and offering arati on his little oval altar. And then he would give me other pictures. He gave me the Panchatattva painting, little photograph, and that painting that I mentioned of Lord Vishnu, just to do Vishnu in the middle. And then another time he brought me over to the wall, and he told me to do the Lord Nrsingadev. I think I've told that story. So that's how it started.
So I was a student at the University of Buffalo and took the course that Rupanuga taught called Teachings in Vedic Civilization. So Todd, Bhakta Todd, who is presently Trivikram Maharaj, he would invite us to the Sunday feast every Sunday. And we never seemed to go. We never went, just because we didn't realize how wonderful it would be, but we had never experienced that. So, but every Sunday he would call, he would never give up, as if he had never asked before. And so one day we said, we should go sometime so that he doesn't feel bad. But still we did not go on Sunday. But then he called on Monday, and he said, hey guys, our spiritual master is coming to University of Buffalo, and we need some cars to drive the devotees to the airport. Would you be able to also, come and bring your car. So that was the kick that we needed. So that was the first time that we actually saw Prabhupada, half bowing down, half trying to get a glimpse of him. And then we followed him back to the temple, the small temple in Buffalo. So that was the first time that we actually gazed our eyes on Srila Prabhupada. But the most important thing was in the evening when he spoke at the university. And the minute I saw Srila Prabhupada and heard him speak, I just felt that he was the captain, he was the general, and I wanted to be on his team. I don't even know if I understood what he was speaking, but the weight of his purity touched me so deeply. And I had heard the chanting 2 years before in San Francisco. So the seed was growing.
San Francisco, 1967, January, I think. It was the mantra rock dance. And I had been living in San Francisco for a year or so, and my sister's boyfriend was putting on the special light effects for that concert. And he gave me a free ticket. And that's why I went. I had no idea there was anything different than just music. So I went. And when I arrived at the concert hall, it was the Big Brother and the Holding Company. Janis Joplin was wailing, and I walked in. I just sat in the back and I was listening to the concert. And then the intermission came. And I was sitting just waiting for the intermission to get over, but after a few minutes into the intermission, I heard some rustling over towards the entrance. And I was curious, what's going on over there? There seemed to be a lot of energy and attention in that direction. So I stood up and I looked over and I saw Srila Prabhupada. And I had visited the temple a couple of times in San Francisco, so I knew who Srila Prabhupada was. And I'd seen the posters for the mantra rock dance. But this was the first time that my eyes were actually able to focus on Srila Prabhupada's transcendental form. And what struck me more than anything else was the sense of purity and cleanliness. I thought, I've never in my lifetime seen someone so clean. Everything about him just seemed so clean. He was the embodiment of cleanliness. That's my memory of my first glimpse of Srila Prabhupada. And then, of course, Srila Prabhupada walked on stage with Allen Ginsberg, and Ginsberg introduced him to the crowd. Srila Prabhupada spoke very briefly about the holy name and about Krishna consciousness being revived by the chanting of the holy name, and the dust on the mirror of the heart being cleansed after having accumulated for many lifetimes. I remember just very briefly, Srila Prabhupada spoke about our dormant Krishna consciousness being revived by the chanting of the holy name. And then Srila Prabhupada sat down, as did Allen Ginsberg, and Ginsberg started the kirtan. But after a few minutes, he moved the mic over to Srila Prabhupada, and then Prabhupada led the kirtan. And I was joining in. There was a large projected Mahamantra on the wall. We were all able to follow. There were something like 2,000 young people in the hall, and many of them had little noisemakers or little instruments or flutes or cymbals. Everybody got involved. Everybody joined, and it was an experience that really planted the seed, I think, of devotional service more than anything up until then, because I experienced the miracle of the power of the holy name and how the holy name had transformed that space, that very mundane space full of loud music and marijuana smoke, to something very, very special and spiritual. And the vision that I had at the time was that I was in a spaceship and we were transcending the material world and entering into another realm, a spiritual realm, by this chanting process.
It was palpable.
Very palpable. It was really, really powerful. I had always wanted to experience a miracle. And at the end of this chanting session, I was completely satisfied. I thought, now I have experienced a miracle. And the miracle was the complete transformation from a very mundane atmosphere to one that was just not of this world.
Oh, when I first saw Srila Prabhupada, I was in high school, and the devotees told me that he was coming the next day. So I ditched school, and I went with the devotees to the airport. And I saw Srila Prabhupada coming off the airplane. And the first thing I thought was how much he had looked like his picture. I couldn't believe it, how he looked like his picture had come to life. And the devotees brought him into a room, and they gave him some water, and he drank it by pouring it. And I thought it was the most elegant, graceful thing I had ever seen. And that was the first time I saw Srila Prabhupada.
At that time, that first visit, the temple room was on the ground floor, on the first floor. I remember Srila Prabhupada sitting down on his Vyasasana and looking at the altar, which was over to his right, and asking, "Where is Tulsi?" Because, well, naturally, the devotees hadn't placed Tulsi Devi on the altar. So there was a scramble, and Srimati Tulsi Devi was brought and placed on the altar, and then Srila Prabhupada took his own garland off and directed the devotees to give that to Tulsi Devi. And he said, "Mother Tulsi is so kind. Treat her as you would any pure devotee of Krishna."
So how I improved by Prabhupada's mercy, it might not be chronological, I'll tell it as I remember it. In 1977, in Prabhupada's quarters at Krishna Balaram Mandir, there was my painting of Radha and Krishna standing on under a kadamba tree, and Muralidar's painting of Krishna and the cows going out to graze in the morning, and the gopis in the background looking. And I was there, there's lots of Indian guests there, and Prabhupada made an announcement that in the beginning she could not paint, but by Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu, the talent came out. Then another time, in 1970, in Boston, I brought him a painting of Bhishma Dev leaving his body lying on the bed of arrows. And Prabhupada had already written me, like make it a sunset scene, but now I was bringing him the painting for any final corrections. So then again he made an announcement, and he said, in the beginning she was not very expert, but I needed an artist, so I engaged her, and now she has become expert. So at every stage of the way, he was encouraging and saying I was expert. Then later he said, she was not expert, now she's expert. So at the very, very first painting that I did of Lord Vishnu, which was about the third painting that I did, I brought it to his room just before he was leaving for India the first time in July of '67. And again, all of my proportions were much, much more crude than the original. Even though it was small, it was very beautiful. Indian print, Brijbasi print. Like his hand looked like a baseball glove, his club looked like an ice cream cone, his causal ocean looked like white question marks on a psychedelic blue solid background. And still, again, Prabhupada was surrounded by his devotees in his quarters upstairs. He said, now who could look at that and say that is not God? So then I thought, yeah, I don't know if I'll be ever able to paint one this good again, but I sure will try for this person who loves me so much. Another big help was just working with the other BBT artists. And sometimes we would physically help each other with the paintings. Then when we had the assembly line, where Prabhupada said, so Mr. A artist works for 2 days, B artist, that was me, 2 days, C artist, 2 days, and then every 2 days, although each painting took 6 days, every 2 days a new painting would come out. Does that make sense? So just working with the other artists, I came up. And then more artists came, and we would have meetings, BBT meetings, where the bunch of us would go to each artist's work and give comments, and the particular artist at the canvas would write down the suggestions, and then, so in that way it was a lot due to Prabhupada's other artists.
So again, I had heard Prabhupada speak at the university when he first arrived, and I don't remember what he spoke, but that's what touched me. But then the following evening, he spoke at a Catholic university, and one student was very arrogant, and the student said, "Swamiji," you know, he was like, he said, "Are you happy?" But he was very arrogant. And Prabhupada didn't respond right away. He paused, and he said, "Will you accept my answer if I tell you?" And the boy just really deflated. And he said, "Yes, I'll accept your answer." And then Prabhupada went like that. "Yes, I am happy." And you know, that taught me a lot, because Krishna's first teaching in Bhagavad Gita is that we have to approach the spiritual master with humility. And so that taught that, you know, in order to get the blessings of the spiritual master and receive some instruction, we have to be humble. So when Srila Prabhupada said, "Yes, I am happy," we could feel that happiness was not like the happiness that we had experienced. It wasn't material happiness, but it was so, so much bigger on such a different platform. And we were anxious to find out what that little bit of what that taste was.
He gave me my name, and he said, "Your name is Jagat Purusa. It is the name of Mahavishnu." And that's what he said. And I was fortunate to be able to garland Srila Prabhupada when he sat on the Vyasasan. I believe it was the first day of his visit, and he was there for close to 4 or 5 days, because we had 2 days of initiations. A lot of devotees were initiated at that time. They came from all over the eastern part of the states. And when I garlanded Srila Prabhupada, he looked at me and he said, "Jai." And that word "Jai" coming from Srila Prabhupada's lips is still reverberating in my heart. I thought, wow, that was so deep. It was, I felt that this was a sound coming from the spiritual world. I really sensed that very strongly. Then I sat, of course, there hearing all of his classes. And the thing that stands out the most in my mind of the classes that I heard was, for some reason, this vision of Srila Prabhupada sitting on the Vyasasan and referring to a painting which was just in front of him on a wall. And it was a painting of Srimati Radharani offering tulsi leaves to the lotus feet of Krishna. And in the background you see the figures of the gopis sort of looking through the trees, looking on. And Srila Prabhupada was talking about that painting and how Srimati Radharani is serving Krishna, and the gopis are assisting Srimati Radharani in her service to Krishna, and other gopis are assisting those gopis. And Prabhupada raised his finger and he said, "So this is our philosophy, that we are the servants of the servants of the servants. And the further down the line you go, the sweeter that service becomes. So I remember so vividly how Srila Prabhupada raised his finger, moved his finger down and said, the further down the line you go, the sweeter that service becomes.
I went to Mayapur in 1976, and I went with the drama troupe, the Vaikuntha Players. But unfortunately, the day I got there, I fell ill, and I was extremely sick with dysentery, and I had a high fever, and I was delirious. And Palika, who was cooking for Srila Prabhupada, also took care of me. She was giving me medicine, and she told me that Srila Prabhupada every day was asking her if I was all right and if I was getting better. And she moved me into the same floor as Pishima, Srila Prabhupada's sister. And her and I shared the bathroom. And I was really, it meant a lot to me. I felt like Srila Prabhupada was personally taking care of me, even though I was just some little kid brahmacharini. When I first met Pishima, Mahamaya was looking after her. And Mahamaya said, "This is my friend Cinmayi. She's from America." And Pishima said, "No, she isn't. She's Bengali." And Mahamaya said, "No, Pishima, she's American." She said, "No, she's Bengali." She just wouldn't believe it. And it was just so funny. I was really pleased. But when I felt like it was a huge compliment. But when I was sick, she really felt bad for me, I'm sure, because she would just come and look at me. Not say anything, just look. And I'd grown really thin. So she also was concerned.
This was 1969, and Prabhupada came to Boston, and in that year, 68 and 69, we did many college and other public programs with him. So one day, Miss Rose was driving him, and we were driving back from the engagement, and we passed a children's blind school in the distance. So Prabhupada said that he wanted us, he turned to me in the back seat, and he said, "I want you to have programs, Sankirtan, in the blind school." So Miss Rose contributed, "You know, they're doing so much for blind children's education these days, advancing and this and that." And Prabhupada said, "Yes, but they need some entertainment." Another time, Janardhan, my godbrother, was driving, and we were coming back from, I believe it was Arlington Street Church. And in that lecture, Prabhupada had been talking about the importance of accepting authority. Like, here we are in this human form of life. The Vedas say, wake up, and don't miss this boon of the human form of life. And then he was even having arguments with some of the people in the audience about authority, as opposed to whimsical. So then, on the way back, we got lost. And finally, we asked the right person, an authoritative person, a policeman, and he said, "Oh, you're going completely in the wrong direction. Your temple is that way." And then again, Prabhupada turned to the back seat and he said, "And they say you don't need authority?" That was two car stories. One more car story. Janardhan was driving, and we passed a Citco gas station. And Janardhan wanted to say something to Prabhupada, so he said, "The American advertising is notorious because they know just how to win over the people." So Prabhupada replied, "Everything material is notorious."
we had my wife at that time, Sukasagari, dasi. We drove down from Cleveland to Tosca in Mexico, which was a center for silversmiths, because we wanted to get deity paraphernalia there for Radha Murlidhar. And on the way up, we learned that Srila Prabhupada was in Chicago, in Evanston. So we decided, okay, we'll detour, since we're on the road, and see Srila Prabhupada before we return to Cleveland. And when I first saw Srila Prabhupada on that occasion, he was in his rooms and he had some guests. There were several Indian families. Can't remember which devotees were there at that time, but Srila Prabhupada was playing with a little child, a little boy, I guess, and he was offering him sweets. And then at a certain point, Srila Prabhupada looked at the child and leaned forward and said, "Now you have to come with me. I have purchased you with these sweets." And and the child became, really backed up and hid behind his mother. And Srila Prabhupada laughed. It was so much fun seeing how he interacted like that. He liked to tease children, but always in such a loving way.
So the next was meeting Srila Prabhupada in New Vrindavan and asking him if we could be initiated and married, and he said, yes, we will do that tomorrow. So we had our initiation and wedding ceremony same time. And when I went up to Srila Prabhupada, he said, "What is your name?" Oh, I have to say one thing. So it's such a beginning movement, and what did we know? Nothing. I still don't know. But anyway, I was thinking to myself, and I didn't tell anybody, if only I could have Krishna in my name. You're thinking, what's your name going to be? If only I could have Krishna in my name. But I didn't say that to anybody. So Srila Prabhupada said, "What is your name?" So I said, "My name is Inez." So Srila Prabhupada said, "All right then, your name shall be Indumati." So then the secretary said, "Srila Prabhupada, there is one lady devotee with that name." And maybe at that time there was only 25 women. So Prabhupada said, "All right then, your name shall be Indira Dasi." And then the secretary said, I think it was Pradumna, maybe, I'm not sure at that time, "Srila Prabhupada, there's also one lady devotee with that name, Indira Dasi." Then Srila Prabhupada said, "I am trying to find something beginning with I, but I cannot. All right then, your name shall be Krishna Bhamini Dasi." And I was so elated. It was like he just knew my heart. And that happens so many times. And it happens even now. Throughout our life, we can see that spiritual master is in the heart and is just understanding.
Several of us were on a morning walk with Prabhupada. In those days, like the late 60s, there was that only the men could surround Prabhupada. We were all with him equally. And even though it was May, it was really freezing that morning. And like a block ahead of us, there was a young lady, attractive young lady, wearing a black no-sleeve shirt and looking like she was freezing to death. So Prabhupada turned to us and said, just see, she'll become a slave to Maya, but she will not become a slave to Krishna. And then he started talking about clothing. He said, sometimes they're naked in the front, sometimes they're naked in the back. And they call this what? Advancement of civilization. Just like they wear these very short skirts that are up to like half the thigh, and then they try to be chaste by pushing it down. And he said, but what have they got to push down? So a few clothing comments.
And on one occasion, I recall a devotee, Prabhupada was quoting something from, I believe it's in the Srimad Bhagavatam, where it talks about the chances of liberation, the relative chances of liberation based upon whether you're a brahmachari or a grahastha or a sannyas. And he mentioned about the percentage of chance that you have, like 25% for a household, or maybe 50% for a brahmachari, 75% for a sannyasi. So one devotee asked Srila Prabhupada about a specific devotee who was a householder, but was engaged in so much service that you wouldn't really think of him as a householder, because he always absorbed in service. And that was Saurabh Prabhu, who later became Saurabhir Abhipaliyantam Swami for a time. So when this question was asked to Srila Prabhupada, Prabhupada stopped and in his very characteristic way drove his cane into the sand. And everyone gathered around to hear what Prabhupada was going to say. And Prabhupada said, Saurabh is not a householder. He is a sannyasi. So that really deepened my understanding of sannyas. Sannyas isn't an outer dress. It's not an outer designation. It is an inner state of consciousness. And he was referring to a devotee who had the consciousness of a sannyasi because he was 24 hours engaged in devotional service.
I spoke up at that time, and I described how to Srila Prabhupada that as we were driving up from Mexico through Texas, we saw a lot of cattle trucks, I guess, transporting cattle. And we had been impressed by how terribly miserable they looked. You could just see little frightened eyes looking out. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned to Prabhupada that these cows looked so much different from our cows at New Vrindavan and at Gitanagari and our protected cows here and there. And Prabhupada turned to his guest and says, he has spoken correctly. In their past life, they were meat eaters, and now they are being taken to the slaughterhouse. That was a very grave moment.
So when I was first painting in Prabhupada's quarters in 1966, I was nothing but a ball of misconceptions. So I thought, Krishna loves Radharani. I want Krishna to love me. Is it okay to be envious of Radharani? So I asked that question to Prabhupada, and he said, no, Radharani is not an ordinary girl. You can only get to Krishna through Radharani.
We worked very hard in Detroit. We began, and we would write Srila Prabhupada sometimes a few times a week, telling him of the progress of the temple and the new people that were coming. And we, after about a year, we moved to another building in a very nice location in Indian Village in Detroit. And we would have the Sunday programs. So Srila Prabhupada came there. He was very pleased. And so he was chanting for morning Bhagavatam class. And then he stopped chanting, and I was holding my young son, Vaishnav Das, who was just a baby. He was in diapers. I'm holding him, and Vaish is having little cartels. And so Prabhupada finished the Jayom prayers, and Vaish is going, ch, 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 ch. He's playing these little cartels in perfect harmony. in perfect rhythm. And Srila Prabhupada said, just see, he is taking up from his last life. How else could he know how to play these at such a young age? And then he began, his whole lecture that morning was on how any progress made in Krishna consciousness is never lost. And we take up where we left off due to Krishna's mercy. So that was really wonderful.
So there was a time that Srila Prabhupada was in the temple. He had given the Bhagavatam class, and he got off the Vyasasana, and he was standing on the side of the temple, and he was surveying, he was looking at the field. Now, just maybe within a month or two before that, one property as a building that was on Hare Krishna land, but it had a separate owner from the rest of Hare Krishna land. And it did not sell until after all the rest of the land, the sale had been completed. And it was owned by a gentleman by the name of Mr. Ratnaparki. So we call it the Ratnaparki house. So that house had been purchased, and Prabhupada was looking out across the field towards that house. And I got a glimpse of Srila Prabhupada looking, and I felt that Prabhupada was looking at the world with eyes that we could never even conceive of. Prabhupada's look of compassion and of just great concern. That's what I felt. Prabhupada was looking. So that was one sense. And then Prabhupada wanted to go to that building and inspect. This was typical. Whenever Prabhupada would come and there was something new constructed, he would like to inspect it. So he started walking across the field towards the building, and we all accompanied him. And I had just so happened that I lived on the upper floor of that building. That was my quarters. And I was with my wife. And so Prabhupada walked in, he looked at all the rooms on the ground floor, and then he went upstairs, and he was facing my door, which of course is locked. We always keep our doors locked in India. And he asked, whose room is this? And someone mentioned this is the room where Jagat Purusa and Gandiva live. And so Prabhupada said, so you can open the door? I said, yes, Srila Prabhupada. And I opened the door, and Prabhupada walked in. And I was so glad that I have a habit of keeping my room tidy. Prabhupada walked in, and he looked around, and he looked very approvingly. And so Srila Prabhupada said, so everything is all right? And I said, yes, Prabhupada. I said, we love this room because it reminds us of Vrindavan. It had something about the atmosphere of Vrindavan. Then he looked at my wife and he said, and everything is all right with you? She said, yes, Prabhupada, thank you by your mercy. And so then he walked out of the room, I locked the door, and then he started looking up, and there was a very rickety staircase going up, not to another floor, but just to kind of an attic area. And as soon as he started looking at that stairway, Tamal Krishna Maharaj said to Prabhupada, Prabhupada, you don't want to walk up there. It's very, very rickety and it's too dangerous. Prabhupada walked past Tamal Krishna Maharaj, past everyone else, and started walking up the stairs, completely ignoring the warning. When he got to the top of the stairs, he looked at this little attic area and he was aghast at what he saw, because there was a pile of Bhagavatams that had been destroyed by water and by insects and worms. And these were books that had been in storage, and the storage had been flooded. The water was sitting there and the books got ruined, and I don't know who put them there, but they were trying to figure out what to do with them, and they thought, well, we'll put them in this place completely out of the way, out of sight, out of mind, not imagining that ever Srila Prabhupada would go there and see these books on this condition. Srila Prabhupada asked, who's responsible for this? I don't remember what the reply was or what the conversation, but I do remember when Prabhupada turned around, I saw that Srila Prabhupada's lip was quivering. And I was, at a very short distance, was able to see Prabhupada in his form of all-encompassing anger. He was so upset. And nobody could say anything. Prabhupada walked down the stairs and he walked towards the shed where the devotees had been living, since the last 2 years. And the previous year, or maybe the previous 6 months, there had been a cornerstone and a ceremony putting down the cornerstone for the new temple construction, even though construction hadn't started. But Prabhupada had presided over that ceremony. And this stone was commemorating that ceremony and had the name of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, founder Acharya A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And it was a stone about this big, and the letters had been, engraved into the stone. Well, somehow or other, I don't know how, but this had broken. And it was sitting on the side of the pathway leading towards the back area of the property. And so in this condition, after seeing these books, Prabhupada stopped and looked at this. This was a rough day for all the devotees. Prabhupada was not happy to see the neglect of the devotees in these important areas where we should be much more conscientious. Well, my sense then, and also in my memory of 40-some years, that these books are Krishna. They are like a deity. And Prabhupada's life is dedicated to worshiping Krishna through giving us these books. And so to see these books, it's not just a personal offense against him. I don't think Prabhupada felt it that way at all. I think that he sensed that, the devotees are not understanding the real identity of these books. And otherwise, something like this would never have happened. So I think that Srila Prabhupada was just very, very disappointed that he is giving us the process to become conscious of Krishna, and yet we still have a long ways to go.
Okay, well, in Los Angeles, after class, Srila Prabhupada would always hand out cookies to the children while we all had kirtan. And somebody brought the cookies out to him and gave them to him, and he touched them with his hand, and he said, "They're too hot." And he handed them to me, and he told me, "You pass them out." So I took the plate, and when I took it, he very lightly touched my hand under the plate, and I was so happy. He had given me a personal service, and also he had touched me with his lotus hand. So I was really, and I had like a job to do, so I stood next to Vyasa-san, and the kids were all coming up, and they were a little bit disappointed and confused, like, why is she passing out the cookies? So every kid came up to get the cookie, and I handed it to them. And well, for me, it was kind of fun. I felt like I was Srila Prabhupada's, personal servant. But the children were disappointed. But they still all came up and got a cookie. And that was just one of my little pastimes that I had.
So many crazy type of people used to come in. You've heard so many stories of Prabhupada in the beginning. Winos would come and offer him wine and toilet paper and things. So some crazy people wearing feathers and leather jackets with the suede jackets with the hanging things. And so one really crazy guy was following me as I was dancing in the circle of devotees that was in front of Prabhupada. And of course I was feeling uncomfortable, and he was getting uncomfortably close. So Prabhupada just indicated to me an easy way out of it. Go sit down. In other words, you just get out of the mess that way.
One other little thing that I remember from a visit to Detroit. Srila Prabhupada took his walks on Belle Isle, which is in the Detroit River. It's a large island and not far from the temple. So we were kind of following behind. I was a temple president, but not a big shot, a minor temple, you know. So I wasn't standing very close to Prabhupada, but I was looking at him, as we all were, and at a certain point, he began looking up. Now, we were walking down a kind of a gravel or dirt road, which was passing through a woodsy area on the east side of the island. There, it's well known for miniature deer, and people go there to see those animals. Prabhupada was looking up this way and that way, looking around, and I was so curious, what's happening? What's he looking at? And all of a sudden, Prabhupada stopped, turned back. Brahmananda, who was there, Brahmananda, there are no monkeys in your country? Hey, Krishna, I think Brahmananda said, no, Srila Prabhupada. Yeah, Prabhupada could always ask a question that rendered everybody speechless.
All my experiences with Srila Prabhupada were really based around my children. So I'd be holding Vaish, and we'd be offering Srila Prabhupada a fruit plate, and Vaish would see that mango, and Prabhupada was ready to put it in his own mouth, and then Vaish was going, ah, and so then Prabhupada would give it to Vaishnav. And another time at the airport, Srila Prabhupada gave Vaishnav a big all-day lollipop. It was called an all-day sucker. Somebody had given it to him, and he gave it to Vaishnav. He was one of the, the earliest children at that time. And after Prabhupada went on the airplane, the devotees attacked the sucker, and all Vaish was left with was the stick. Poor Vaishnav. Srila Prabhupada was so kind and caring. He saw all of us as his children. He would always write, "My dear sons and daughters, my beloved children," and he loved his grandchildren as well. He always said that they, our children's children, would take up even more seriously than we. So he was very loving. Always in the letters he would write at the end of the letters, "Please offer my blessings to your lovely children," like that. So he was very kind and compassionate to the children. Once in France, Manjari was very young, and she was fanning Srila Prabhupada. He was doing artik to Radha Parasishwara, and Manjari was fanning him with her little yaktail fan. And Prabhupada turned after, and he turned around and he said, "Thank you very much." He didn't treat her as a baby or as a little child. He just treated her as another little devotee who was rendering service. It was very wonderful.
So again, in Mumbai, it was Bombay back then, but I was pujari, but I was also occasionally cooking. And we had a new kitchen, not in the new constructed area. It was actually a little down the street where we had to go down where Prabhupada's books were kept, and that was converted into a kitchen. And Harikesh Maharaj and I had designed and built this kitchen. And I had just finished cooking the Rajbhog on the day that Srila Prabhupada was arriving. And while I was in the kitchen, I was imagining the devotees. I knew the devotees had gone, had left for the airport, and I was imagining how it would be in the airport, meeting Prabhupada, having kirtan, bringing Prabhupada back. And there was a little part of me that was perhaps lamenting that I couldn't be there. But I had my service, and I knew that this is where I was meant to be. So I wasn't resentful, but I was thinking, and I was musing and wondering, I wonder where Prabhupada is now. He should be getting back soon, and he will be taken undoubtedly directly to his quarters. While I'm thinking like this, the door of the kitchen swings open, and there's Srila Prabhupada. And he walks into the kitchen. And of course, I hit the deck, offered my obeisances, and Srila Prabhupada gave a full inspection of the new kitchen. And I had just finished the Rajbhog offering and had cleaned the kitchen, and everything was neat and tidy, and Prabhupada was approving of the condition of the kitchen. Prabhupada said, very nice. So I was very fortunate. And so I thought of that many times. And I think also in this regard, the instruction of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, that don't try to see Krishna, but act in such a way that Krishna will want to come and see you. So I think of this experience with Srila Prabhupada. I didn't get a chance to go and see Prabhupada, but Prabhupada came to see me.
In Los Angeles, I rode with Kavi Chandra's Sankirtan party for a while. I needed a break from Cleveland, my duties there, so they had come through Cleveland, and so I just got on their bus, and not a bus, but in their van, and we headed out down south and across. But then we heard that Srila Prabhupada was going to be arriving in Los Angeles, so we went straight across to LA. And when Srila Prabhupada arrived there, there had been an incident, an unfortunate incident. A devotee, I think a devotee had been killed, murdered. Anyway, Srila Prabhupada was lecturing, and I'm sure there's a tape of this, so I can only say how it impressed me. But Prabhupada said, by accepting the spiritual master, you have become deathless. And then he challenged his own statement, as he sometimes did. So one will say, how can you say deathless? Devotee is also dying. Prabhupada said, that is not death. It is something like sleeping. Close your eyes. And then, as I recall, Srila Prabhupada opened his eyes as only he could. So it just seemed to open forever. And he looked around. It is Vaikuntha. So in other words, something like sleeping, and then you're with Krishna. So, wow, that was a wonderful moment.
When I was married, although we had very, very clear instructions from Prabhupada how to behave, still it was difficult to follow the regulative principles at that time. Mm-hmm. So one morning, after we had difficulty, my husband went to fix the picture window of the storefront of the temple, and somehow or other, the window fell on his face and split his whole face in half, and he had to be rushed to the hospital. So he wrote to Prabhupada that what was that? Why did that happen? So Prabhupada wrote back, this is a summary punishment of the law of karma. He said, when you have a fan and then you pull out the fan, then it doesn't stop in 1 second, but it gradually gets slower. So in that way, the sufferings that a aspiring devotee undergoes is a summary of what we would have gotten. He said, but if you again pull in the plug, then again you'll get karma.
On another occasion, just in terms of something that struck me, there were the Bhagavat Saptaha discourses, right? Bhagavad Dharma discourses. And at that time, everyone was assembled up on the hilltop with the big pavilion and everything like that. And I really remember so much Srila Prabhupada's remark that someone may question why this man is being given this honor. It is to teach them how to worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So Prabhupada, of course, can also be understood, the meaning of the word, as one who has taken the place of Prabhu, who is the stand-in, who is the practice God, in a way. I've never forgotten that. Those were really wonderful hours spent with Srila Prabhupada up there.
In Detroit, we were very fortunate that we were able to edit Srila Prabhupada's books. And I wrote Srila Prabhupada when I became pregnant with my son. And he wrote me such a kind letter back. And he said, I told him how I was going on Sankirtan full time. And he wrote me back. And he said, in the advanced stages of pregnancy, you should not travel by train or plane, and you should refrain from going on Sankirtan. And we would go for 8 hours a day in Detroit. And so I began editing Krishna book and also preparing prasadam for the devotees when they would return. And at that time also, I was working on children's version of Sri Upanishad. And I sent Srila Prabhupada the first chapter. And he wrote me back and he said, for children, it must be very easily understood. He said, for example, how can they understand this term Brahmajyoti, which I had included? He said, you must say, instead of Brahmajyoti, you must say, just as there is sun, there is shine coming from the sun, so there is another shine coming from Krishna's body. That is Brahmajyoti. So he said, do this work very nicely.
So at one point in time, we decided we should start having plays for the audience, those who would come for the Sunday program. And we developed that, and it became a habit. And then when Srila Prabhupada was coming to be present during the appearance day of Lord Nrsingadev, we thought, let's do a Lord Nrsingadev play for Srila Prabhupada. So we had about 2 weeks to practice. And I was able to recruit the devotees to take the various parts. And we presented this play to Srila Prabhupada. And many devotees have heard the tape, because the tape of Srila Prabhupada's lecture was recorded, and what Srila Prabhupada said before the lecture, which was immediately after the play, was also recorded. For me personally, it was an experience of a lifetime. I had directed the play, but I also played the part of Hiranyakashipu. And one would be surprised that I would play, a skinny fellow like me would play Hiranyakashipu, but actually it was perfect for the early austerity part of that pastime. I mean, I could be seen with all of my ribs showing and standing with my arms raised, performing the austerities. And then came time for Lord Brahma to come and sprinkle the water from the Kamandalu, and then I got off stage and I very quickly put lots of padding on all around and put, the king's clothing on, and I came out as the king of the universe, Hiranyakashipu. So we did this play, and before anybody had come to the temple, I had built a paper mache column in the corner of the temple where there was a pipe structure, but I made it large enough so that a large devotee, that large devotee being Bhagavat Das, he could fit in there with his full costume as Lord Nrsingadev. And I also wanted him to narrate because he had the best voice for narrating the play. So I thought, how am I going to do this? Well, I came up with the idea of having a speaker inside the column, and I put a little hole so he could see what's going on, and then I ran the speaker wires across the pipes, concealed, nobody could see them, and into the speakers, so he could watch everything and he could do the narration from inside the pillar, and everyone would hear it coming from the speakers. So we were doing the play, and suddenly, right from the beginning of the play, it ceased being a play because Srila Prabhupada was there. And Prabhupada was responding and reacting to everything that we did. And Prabhupada's presence gave us the sense, certainly for myself, that this isn't a play, this is the pastime. I'm not an actor. I am Hiranyakashipu. And it was very powerful. And everything went smoothly. It was just amazing. And when the time came for Lord Nrsingadev to come out of the pillar, Srila Prabhupada went like this, and he went back on his Vyasasan. And devotees were afraid that maybe the Vyasasan was going to tip over, but it didn't. But Prabhupada, several times during the play, devotees were telling me they were too busy watching Prabhupada, they couldn't see much of the play. Because Prabhupada's eyes would get big, and he used to get so surprised, he'd smile at certain parts. So it was an amazing opportunity to please Srila Prabhupada. So then the play came to the end. I was lying dead on the floor, having been killed by Lord Nrsingadev. And then we kind of all sat, wherever we were, we just sat and waited for Srila Prabhupada to say something. I was about maybe 5 feet away from Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada said, and this is recorded, so nobody can say I'm telling a lie or I'm making it up. Prabhupada said, so this is the appearance day of Lord Nrsingadev, Nrsinga Chaturdasi. And Prabhupada said that I am so pleased that these boys have put on this play. After a short period, they have put together this play. And I especially want to thank Mr. Hiranyakashipu. Prabhupada said that Mr. Hiranyakashipu has played his part very nicely. And so, I mean, this is the moment I wanted to leave my body like that. This is the time to have this recognition that the spiritual master is pleased by one's service. It was very, very special. And it was a great memory.
On a walk during that same visit around that Cheviot Hills golf course that Srila Prabhupada liked to walk in, some devotee, we were walking, some devotee piped up and said, Srila Prabhupada, yesterday we walked around in the other direction. Today we're walking around this way. Everything looks different. Prabhupada paused, looked at him, long pause, and says, yes, they're going this way, and then they're going that way. It is all different. And immediately we understood, yeah, he's talking about samsara, right? The repeated births and deaths, and how each time, you know, chewing the chewed, each time, though, we're thinking, oh, brand new.
Many devotees ask me how the concepts for the paintings came about. Do we choose the pictures, or how did the pictures happen to come? So in the beginning, for the Krishna book, Srila Prabhupada, in one of his letters to me, this was at the end of 68, I believe, he said, I'm going to give you hints for the Krishna book paintings. So he would give a list of 5, like for example, Devaki pregnant with Krishna inside her womb, and the demigods around near the ceiling offering prayers, and then her holding Krishna in her arms, Vasudeva carrying Krishna across the river, like that. And he said, when you send me, because he was in Los Angeles, we were in Boston, and we sent him the paintings in Los Angeles, and then he actually had them go up on his walls, and he would offer them flowers. He said, these paintings are our ISKCON mottos. And then he sent the second list of 5 paintings. And he did that with Muralidhar as well. Gradually, he just told us, you pick out the paintings. Same thing with Bhagavad Gita. Duryodhana, in the tent of Dronacharya, telling, this is the other army, this is what our army has, and several other paintings. So he did that twice or so, and then he said, you pick out the pictures. Srimad Bhagavatam, you pick out the pictures. So we would pick out what was the most significant themes, because generally Bhagavatam, for example, had themes, like the theme of Brahma's creation, the theme of Vishnu's creation, and then we'd pick out what scene would encapsulate most of that concept or tattva or pastime. And then later on, sometimes I would pick out the pictures, and sometimes later the devotees would pick out pictures together, and then we would submit them to Prabhupada, and if we had any doubts, we'd ask him. Like one doubt that we had was in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, when Lord Chaitanya was becoming like a tortoise, all of his limbs went inside of his body in his ecstasy of separation. He said, no, don't do that one. Just show him very beautiful fainting there at the Gambhira. This was around the time of 74, when Radhaballabha Prabhu, who was the production manager of the BBT, and I decided that our previous simplistic paintings weren't good enough and we wanted to put in more technically better paintings. So we had this kind of Rasalila painting, and I thought, this is so much better than the one that Devahuti did. Hers was a copy of the Indian, like Loy Bazaar version, and it was very stylized. And Prabhupada, in his discussion with Ramaswara, when he said, who wants to change the paintings without asking me? They are rascals, and he called me like a Kali Yuga hippie, liking to see long, wild hair. And he said, this painting is like a hippie plaything, and I much prefer the painting of Devahuti's, which was very dignified.
On another visit to New Vrindavan, the temple was still in, I guess, Bahulaban, which was the original temple site. A farmhouse had been converted and the temple room had been built off the back. So it was very crowded whenever Srila Prabhupada would visit. Really standing room only, there was no standing. There was, people were squeezed in like, I don't know what. The night of Janmashtami, Srila Prabhupada was there, all the devotees were packed in. I felt like there wasn't even enough oxygen for us. So I was squeezed in so tightly. Srila Prabhupada was having people reading from Krishna book, I guess. And he was sitting there, and I was dozing off from lack of oxygen, I think, and heat and pressure. I would doze off, and I was looking at Srila Prabhupada, and it also appeared like Srila Prabhupada was dozing off, and I said, well, that's natural. This is an impossible situation here. I'd look at Prabhupada, and Prabhupada would appear to be nodding too. And then all of a sudden, he would open his eyes, and he would make a remark about what had just been read. to elucidate something or to expand on something. And this happened a number of times where it appeared that he was sleeping, but then instantly awake and to the point, right? And at that time, I guess I understood that Srila Prabhupada is not like me. If he sleeps, he's not sleeping in any way like I am. You know, he doesn't lose his Krishna consciousness. He remains alert to Krishna at all times.
Yeah, I never wrote Srila Prabhupada with problems. I just felt that, you know, he had enough to deal with, and I always wanted to write him positive information, what we were doing that would please him. But he was always, you know, so kind and considerate, inquiring about the welfare of the children and how we should take care. One time he stopped Bhagavatam class because he saw my son sucking his thumb, and he said, "You should put bitters on his fingers." So he stopped the class just to say you should put bitters on his fingers.
How we would communicate our ideas to Prabhupada to get it either authorized or rejected. Sometimes we would give him sketches, which we did for sketches, or if we were in the middle of a painting, we would send him the painting, and he was very detail conscious. So one time we sent Bharadwaj's painting of Lord Ram and the monkeys walking across the rock bridge. And so the painting wasn't finished. So Prabhupada said, "Why is Ram wearing only one anklet?" And sometimes, like in the painting of the contemplating the objects of the senses, then comes attraction, lust, anger, bewilderment, falling down into the material pool. And then we'd send that to Prabhupada. And Bharadwaj had made that last frame, he'd made a person entangled in the coils of a snake. And first, Prabhupada wrote back, "Why a snake?" And then in a second letter, he wrote, "Yes, actually the snake is fine, because sometimes time is called Kala Sarpa, the serpent-like snake." So either we'd send sketches and he'd approve or disapprove or correct, or we'd send paintings in midstream. Sometimes I made the mistake of doing nothing and then just publishing, because you really need the person Bhagavad, even if you have his book Bhagavad, because in the third canto, or Nectar of Devotion, it's described how during Krishna's Rasa Leela, when he was dancing with the gopis, everything became disheveled. The dresses became disheveled, started falling. The hair was all over. And in the Nectar of Devotion, it said that his hair was so long that it looked like he was being embraced by the goddess of fortune. So I did this whole big endeavor, and I was so proud of myself, of taking several devotees with me to some big garden in New York, Brooklyn Botanical Garden. And Murli Vadana, the BBT photographer, came and took many pictures, and then I did this Rasa Leela painting, and it was printed in his book, and he said, "This painting ruined my book. It should be ripped out of every book."
And I don't remember whether it was that visit or another, but it was in that same temple room at Bahulaban. On one occasion, someone asked me to fan Srila Prabhupada with a chamara. And I guess Guru Puja was going on, or I'm not sure exactly what was happening around, because I was focused on that task. But I was doing my best, fanning Prabhupada with the chamara, and Prabhupada kept on kind of looking up. And I thought, okay, you know, be even more attentive or more determined. Finally, Srila Prabhupada reached up, and he gestured that he wanted me to hand him the chamara. So, okay, I turned it around and handed it to Srila Prabhupada. And then Prabhupada started to demonstrate with his own hand, up here like this, how the chamara should be used as a fly whisk. Tick, 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 tick. Not like a peacock fan, but chick, 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 chick. And then do you have it? I said, yes, he handed it back to me. So yeah, yet another occasion when Srila Prabhupada corrected me, you know, the Charanamrita and then the chamara.
So again, my association with Srila Prabhupada was so much centered around the children. This is a very personal story, but I will share it anyway. So when I was pregnant with my son, we would refer, trying so hard to be Krishna conscious, so instead of referring to the baby, is the baby kicking, we wouldn't say that. We'd say, just between us, is the little Vaishnav kicking? Not knowing boy, girl, whatever, but just, it's not a baby, it's a Vaishnav, hopefully. So when I gave birth, Bhagavan called Srila Prabhupada and said, Krishna Bhamini gave birth to a son. Would you kindly name him Srila Prabhupada? And Srila Prabhupada named him Vaishnav Das. And it was just unbelievable. I said to Bhagavan, did you tell him that we were referring to the baby as the little Vaishnav? And he said, no, I didn't. And so it was just another confirmation after my name giving and then Srila Prabhupada naming Vaishnav what we had been calling him all along, just privately. So spiritual master Srila Prabhupada is certainly in our hearts and is really manifestation of Super Soul.
A lot of my association with Srila Prabhupada came by letter because so many paintings had to come out for his so fast books that were coming out. So wherever he was in the world, even though it was snail mail, the moment he got our letter, he would immediately reply. So if it took 7 days to get to India, we got the letter back in exactly 2 weeks because he would answer it right away. So we'd ask questions like when Hiranyakashipu and Lord Brahma are fighting because Hiranyakashipu had thrown the earth into the Garbhodak ocean at the bottom of the universe. So we would ask questions like, exactly how were they fighting on the water, and where was Brahma and the demigods at that time? They're showering flowers. So Prabhupada would write to us all in one letter and just number them. We had our numbers 1 to 15, he had his numbers 1 to 15, and zip, 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 he'd give the answers. Like he'd say, Varaha and Hiranyaksha were fighting on the water. Brahma was observing from the sky. Rocks are coming while being balanced on the tusks of while rocks are coming from the earth. While the earth was balanced on the tusks of Varaha, yes, the demigods are present in the sky around. Now, one of the really inconceivable ones was the creation of Mahavishnu and Mahavishnu glancing over the illusory energy and in time, by the combination of time, his glance, the unmanifest material nature, everything in the cosmic manifestation would develop. So like, okay, Prabhupada, how do you do that one? Like now we have it, and it's, all right, well there it is, everybody thinks there it is, but we had nothing. So he wrote in this letter, time mixes with the material energy just like a flower bud. In due course of time, the bud fructifies and comes into a flower. Or like a time bomb, in due course, it bursts out. Then he tried again. Agitation of time is just like a water pot put on the fire. And after some time, becomes boiled. When it comes to this boiling point, that is agitation, because we said, okay, Prabhupada, what does it mean that time is agitated? Or with chemicals, if alkaline and acid mixed, there is effervescence or agitation. He would end his letters by saying things like, well, thank you for helping me in this way. I hope this meets you in good health. And then he would always say, but it is artist's work to figure out. I'm giving you this information, but it's the artist's work to figure out how to do it. Once I asked a question about Lord Brahma, and his answer was, that you have to ask Brahma. And once I wrote him and said, I'm so frustrated because, you know, your needs for the different temples that are developing and the books, how can I paint faster and better? He said, just pray to Krishna sincerely, and he will help you paint faster and better.
On another visit to New Vrindavan, Srila Prabhupada was having darshan out on the grass. I suppose it was in the front of the house where he was staying. This was not in Bahulaban, this was up the road. And I think the palace was already under construction maybe at that time, so this was not far from the palace. And so consequently not very far from the current main temple. Anyway, we were there on the grass with Srila Prabhupada. He told the story, and forgive me because I'm not absolutely sure if this was during the darshan or just before, but he told the story of the Brahmin and the cobbler, which we all know. The Brahmin was distinguished, proud of his position, and the cobbler, of course, was way down the social order, near the bottom. They both met Narada, and both asked Narada what he was doing and where he was going on his travels, and Narada told them both, I'm going to Vaikuntha to visit Lord Narayan. So both asked, oh, well, please come back and tell me about that. Yeah? So subsequently, Narada returned and first saw the Brahmin, and the Brahmin said, oh, did you see Lord Narayan? And Narada said, yes, indeed. What was he doing? And Narada said, he's threading an elephant through the eye of a needle. And the Brahmin incredulously protested, that's not possible. What are you trying to trick me? You didn't see Lord Narayan. You know, dismissed it. And then Narada came to the cobbler, who also asked, and what is Lord Narayan doing in Vaikuntha? And so Narada said, he's threading an elephant through the eye of a needle. And the cobbler said, oh, my Lord is so great, you know, wonderful, Narayan. And Narada was astonished, and he said, how is it that you accept that fantastical story without any doubt? And the cobbler said, see where we are sitting under this enormous banyan tree here. And this banyan tree comes from this tiny seed. So if the Lord can place an enormous banyan tree within a tiny seed, what difficulty does he have threading an elephant through the eye of a needle? So Prabhupada told that story. And I became a little confused, a little doubtful, because I had, I think, recently been reading these verses in the 9th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna says, O son of Pritha, those who take shelter in me, though they be of lower birth, women, Vaishyas, and Shudras, can attain the supreme destination. Then, in the next verse, Lord Krishna says, text 33, how much more this is so of the righteous Brahmins, the devotees, and the saintly kings. Therefore, having come to this temporary miserable world, engage in loving service unto me. It's that how much more this is so that was bothering me. So I was kind of near the front of that group, seated on the grass in front of Prabhupada. So I said, Srila Prabhupada, you had previously told this story of the Brahmin and the cobbler, and clearly, in that instance, it was the cobbler, the low-born person, who was the great faithful devotee, and the Brahmin, even though he was a distinguished man, not so. So how is it then that Krishna says this? How much more so are the Brahmins, the righteous kings, and so on and so forth? Anyway, I got my question out, probably very badly and garbled. Prabhupada paused for quite a bit. He looked at me, he said, you do not understand this? No. You do not understand this? You do not understand this? 3 times he asked me. And of course, by that time, I was shrunk. And Srila Prabhupada said, if you and I and Kirtanananda Swami get into a car together, does that mean that you are equal to Kirtanananda Swami? Does it mean you are equal to your spiritual master? And you wish you could explain how those rays of of displeasure, were radiating, from Prabhupada. Of course, I was just trembling. No, of course not. Prabhupada said, as soon as we stop making distinctions, then we're Mayavadis. Then we're impersonalists. He paused again, and he lifted his garland. Now, at that time in New Vrindavan, there was an effort both for the sake of economy and also for the sake of the principle of simple living, high thinking. There was an effort to offer to Krishna things that were local, things that were easily available without a lot of extra effort, or certainly without paying money, to merchants in Pittsburgh or wherever, or Moundsville. So Srila Prabhupada lifted his garland, and this garland had roses, and it also had leaves, greenery, which was kind of offsetting the roses. Prabhupada said, in this garland, the roses are valuable. These leaves, not so much. So if I say, I am accepting even the leaves within this garland, what to speak of the roses? Now do you understand? And this, I thought, a wave of understanding, you know, went out throughout our little group, and Prabhupada smiled because he also must have felt like that. What a perfect way of paraphrasing Krishna's words here. Even these leaves I'm accepting. What to speak of the roses? It was wonderful. So later there was kirtan. I think very soon after that there was kirtan. It was very ecstatic. And Prabhupada started to take that garland apart and was throwing it to the devotees. And then he broke apart that little section that he had showed with the rose and the leaves, and he tossed that to me. You know, he appeared to be so happy. But I guess the thing that I remember most was how pleased Prabhupada was also. That everybody, the speaker, the hearer, the guru, the disciple, everyone becomes filled with happiness when Krishna is discussed or when Krishna is explained, you know. It was wonderful. I kept that little, for many years I kept it. I eventually lost track of that, but that was a real relic for me.
The next time, I gave birth to Manjari, and we also wrote Srila Prabhupada, and he wrote me back a very beautiful letter, which I have here. I'll just read a little bit of it. He wrote, "Dear Krishna Bhamini, please accept my blessings. I always receive your letters with great pleasure. I offer my blessings to your new child, Manjari Devi Dasi. Have a feast, perform fire yajna, and Bhagavan may offer her a garland and announce, our spiritual master has given her this nice name. So now your first duty should be to see your children develop nicely. There is no doubt they are advanced souls. So simply being in the association of their parents and other devotees, they will very quickly make advancement." So that has been one of my foremost instructions from Srila Prabhupada, to take nice care of my children. I've been trying to do that for the last 50 years and ongoing. So even though I was very new at being a mother, and I never had a younger brother or sister, and it was very difficult being a good parent in those days. But I'm hoping that over the years I have been taking that instruction to heart, and by Krishna's grace, all my children and grandchildren, they're all following in the footsteps and love Srila Prabhupada dearly.
He's a lot more than what meets the eye. He's not just an Indian man or an Indian guru. He has the surrender and the devotion that we can't even touch. But you have to keep trying and keep purifying yourself by chanting and by just keeping in the association of his words and his lectures and his books.
So of all of the qualities of Srila Prabhupada, I think that what stands out for me is Srila Prabhupada's absolutely unconditional love for all of us. Not just all of us, all of every living entity. And I think that this is why Srila Prabhupada was able to do what he did. is that we all felt that love, and we could feel how genuine it was. And this was our chance to experience Krishna's love, God's love, through Srila Prabhupada. That's what stands out for me more than anything else.
I can certainly not say there's one that I especially loved of Prabhupada's qualities, of his 26 qualities. Because how many mistakes and offenses I made, and how tolerant he was. Like one time when I was married, I especially made the most offenses. And so I asked my husband to write to him and say, please forgive me for my offenses. So he said, Prabhupada wrote back, I have not noticed any offenses, and if you made offenses, I forgive them 100 times. So his tolerance and his humility, how even though he's coming from the spiritual world, and when we would talk with him, we were coming from the material world, he's coming from the spiritual, it looked like we're in the same place. And he would speak to us just like one time I made a very big mistake of not following his instruction and how to paint Narada Muni. He gave me a picture of Narada Muni. I painted that, he loved it. Then I thought, well, I could do better than that. I went to the library in Boston, found a nice muscly, did I tell this before? I told that before.
Yeah, but go ahead.
Nice muscly Lord Jesus. I painted Narada muscly. And so I won't tell the whole thing again. But when I met Prabhupada after our letter exchange, he said, there's no point in trying to be a good artist to please the senses of the public. They're rascals. He said, people don't care how good the painting is. They just care who did it. I said, well, we do that too. We say, oh, Prabhupada said that? Oh, very good. And he said, oh, well, that's just like a mother has a blind child and he names the child Lotus-eyed. So in that way, you're appreciating me. And then we were sitting close together like that on the trunk. And then he said, I like your eyes, cat's eyes. Everyone likes cat's eyes, don't you? I said, I like your eyes, lotus eyes. He said, I'm just an old fool. And you really felt that from him. And also his brilliance, because that I appreciated so much, because we had to ask him questions like, what did this person look like? And how old is Vidura? And how old is Ramananda Rai? And did he have a mustache? And what did their hut look like? And he was just right there with the answers. So it's his brilliance, his tolerance, his humility. Everything.
Srila Prabhupada loved coming to New Mayapur. It was a beautiful community, 200 acres. We grew so many fruits and vegetables and had a beautiful room for Srila Prabhupada. He felt really peaceful there, and he really was so happy that we were developing this farming community and having cows. And I remember I was going through a difficult time at that last time that he had come to New Mayapur. And, you know, when he spoke in class, you felt like he was speaking right to you. I felt like he was speaking right to me. And he said, no matter how much difficulty, you know, we are undergoing in Krishna consciousness, don't think that the happiness in the material world is better. He said, your worst day in Krishna consciousness, your most difficult struggle day is much, much, much better than any happiness you would experience in the material world. And he really implored us all, please don't leave Krishna. Don't leave Krishna. And, you know, it's not that we haven't left Krishna. Srila Prabhupada has never left us. And I can see, it's 50 years now that Srila Prabhupada has kept me and my family and my husband and my children and my grandchildren, all under his wing. So he has promised to stay with us always, and he doesn't want us to leave. So that's wonderful memories.
Jai Anilo Prema Dona